Today's question came through anonymous, and it came through on the heels of a series that we did called Call of Duty. Now, I don't think this question was related to anything that we said in that message, but we want to answer this question nonetheless. The person is asking, is playing lotto a sin, and why? Okay, wow. Is playing the lotto a sin, and why? So let me say this to you. We don't get a lot in the scriptures about gambling, though we do see things that could be compared in regard to taking risks. So there are some casting of lots and things like that we see in the scriptures. We do see them, or we do see in the scriptures sometimes trying to depend on chance to make a decision. And I'm not even talking about in the New Testament where they're looking for God to answer as they cast lots. But there is an issue even with Samuel, in the book of Samuel, about kind of the dependence on chance, right, for an outcome. And so we don't see a lot about gambling. However, I do want to mention that when it comes to the lotto specifically and other types of gambling, there are some things that we need to be mindful of and conscious of, right? So the first thing is motive. So when we're dealing with the lotto, you're dealing with money. We're talking about, can I win a whole lot of money? That's the bottom line. That's the point and the purpose of lotto, right? Anytime that we're dealing with the lottery. And motive plays a large part in whether or not something can be right or wrong. Please hear me on this. Motive can play a part on whether or not something is right or wrong. One of the things that you've heard me say in the past, those of you who are D-weighers, is, you know, a man can buy a woman flowers because he wants to give her something. But a man can also buy a woman flowers because he wants to take something from her. The purchasing of flowers normally can be a beautiful expression. But if the motive behind it is to take something from a woman, then the act itself is tainted by the motive. And I think James kind of addresses this, right? James addresses this a little bit when he talks about, okay, you have not because you ask not. And then he says, but when you do ask, you ask with wrong motive. And he's talking about money, because he then says that you would spend what you get on your pleasures. And so there's the problem, right? If the motive for playing the lotto or playing the lottery is to acquire masses to large sums of money, to turn our attention and our focus to our pleasures, right? The various things we want to go, want to have, the money we want to spend, maybe how we want to look before others. If the motive is impure, then we have a problem, right? And I'm saying this largely because while the Bible doesn't say that gambling is a sin, we do recognize that gambling has other issues that fall into sin. So for instance, if our pride is so puffed up that we want money to help us to boost our pride, maybe drive certain cars that help to boost our pride, live in certain places, have certain clothes that really do kind of speak to our pride, that's a potential issue. If our attention is taken off of God and put on all of our pleasures, that is an issue. And think about this. The reason why Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through a needle, the eye of a needle, than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven is partly because a significant amount of wealth answers a lot of everyday problems that people have. But as it answers those problems, it covers up the condition of the spirit. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talked about, blessed are those who are poor in spirit. The realization that spiritually one is in a deficit is one of the things that helps us to recognize our need for Jesus. So if I have so much money that I don't have a way to recognize a deficit within myself, or even have a reason to cry out to a God who is greater than I am, then my chances of finding Jesus are harder. My chances of focusing on Jesus are harder. I know many people have come to Jesus out of need And some of those needs could have been met with dollars, which means that if those people who met Jesus because of their need had dollars, they may not have met Jesus at all. And so when it comes to playing the lottery, the question is, okay, do we have the right motive? Is the motive right? The second thing is, if we were to win that money, would our attention be shifted away from God? Would we be so focused on our pleasures that we would just simply ignore the God who desires for us and created us to serve him? And I believe this is why Jesus said you can't serve two masters. You can't serve both money and God. If money is your master, then you'll forget God. Serving him won't be a priority, but that is what every single one of us was created to do, to serve him. The other challenge is this, and I'm going to end with this. The other challenge is gambling can have an addictive lure. Drugs have a certain kind of addiction that's twofold. It gets you twice, right? Oftentimes people get addicted to drugs because they're trying to overcome some emotional hurts and pains, right? Taking drugs kind of dulls some emotional pains. But what happens is a person begins to dull those emotional pains regularly with drug use, and then the body gets addicted. Gambling is similar. It does get you twice. It doesn't give you a physical addiction, though it does give you an emotional addiction. But in addition to the emotional addiction, it can bind you in financial addiction, right? So you could be gambling as a habit, like I just can't help but to continue to try to risk, to try to win, right? But as a result of that, you could put yourself in financial peril to where you think you need to win. Now, the challenge with dependencies of all sorts, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, any dependency, is it shifts us in the opposite direction of where God wants us. Ultimately, God wants us to depend on him and him alone. He wants us to depend on him for our emotional needs. He wants us to depend on him for our financial needs, right? This is one of the things that Jesus said. Jesus said, don't worry about what you'll eat or drink or what you'll wear. God knows you need these things, but rather seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. So God wants you to seek him first, his kingdom, and trust him to provide for you all the other things that you need. He really does want our dependence in every facet of life to be on him. And so when we engage in anything that can shift our dependence to other areas, now we're in danger of perhaps establishing an idol in our life that draws us further away from the dependence on God, which is ultimately where he wants us to be. So this has been Overflow. I hope whoever asked that question, I hope I answered it for you. And for those of you who are in the Tampa Bay area, I hope to see you at Designer's Way Christian Church someday soon. And for our D-Way family, peace. I'll see you this weekend. Love you. God bless. Don't forget, we will be back with another Overflow next week.